Recording, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Thank you so much. Ms. Pacina, you want to start us off with a roll call?
Good morning, Commissioners. Roll call. District 1?
Present.
District 2?
District 2 present.
District 3 vacant. District 4?
District 4 present.
District 5, Chair Shadid.
Present.
District 6?
Present.
District 7 absent. District 8?
Present.
District 10? I'm sorry, District 9.
District 9 is present and has the District 9 coffee right here.
District 10 vacant. District 11?
Present.
District 12? District 12? Okay. District 13?
Present.
District 14?
Present.
And place 15, Vice Chair Rubin.
I'm here.
You have quorum, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pacina. Good morning, Commissioners. Today is January 6, 2022. It is exactly 10:37 a.m. Welcome back. The train has not stopped. I hope that the holiday season was good to you. I hope that Santa was good to you. I see Ms. Thompson is raring to go, and I know Santa was good to her. Welcome back from a well-deserved vacation. Commissioners, we're going to start out right off the top with the briefing of DCA201-008, and Ms. Thompson and Mr. Doss will lead the way. Good morning.
Good morning, Robin. If I could have sharing privileges, I'll have the presentation this morning. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is item DCA201-008, consideration of amending the Dallas Development Code, Chapter 51A-4.1100, mixed income housing, in order to support and align with the One Dallas Options program within the City of Dallas Comprehensive Housing Policy. The overall purpose is really to align, this specific item is to align Section 51A-4.1100 with proposed amendments to the Comprehensive Housing Policy. That includes a new program called One Dallas Options that we'll explain further. And essentially, One Dallas Options expands the existing mixed income housing development bonus program with some additional flexibility. And moving alongside of the proposed amendments to Chapter 51A, there are also proposed amendments to Chapter 20A, which is the housing chapter, Chapter 52, which is the building inspections permitting administrative chapter, and the Comprehensive Housing Policy. The intent is to kind of bring all of those proposed amendments as a package.
Mr. Doss, pardon me, sir. Can you maybe get a little closer to the microphone? We're having a little bit of trouble making out what you're saying,
no
sir.
problem. I'll speak a little bit louder. Let me see if my microphone can be turned up. Oh. I can. Oh, I'll just speak louder. So again, I'll take one step back. The intent is to kind of package proposed amendments to Chapter 51A, Chapter 20A, the housing chapter, Chapter 52, which is the administrative chapter for building inspections and permitting, and Comprehensive Housing Policy, package those and take them to their respective committees and commissions and boards, and take those to City Council in early 2022. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pam and let her kind of go through the background and the proposed amendments. So Pam, take it away.
Sure. So we're going to start with looking at the current mixed income bonus. The purpose of that mixed income bonus program is to create mixed income housing development all across the city by providing zoning bonuses for multifamily developers in exchange for on-site affordable housing. Although the original program was written as a by right bonus, there are two tracks: the by right bonus in multifamily and mixed use districts, and a base plus bonus structure in new planned development districts. These are what we're proposing to call Type 1 and Type 2 developments in the One Dallas program. And I'll explain what that is later in the presentation. And then I should also note that over the past few years, a handful of zoning cases have come through that have requested a zoning change from some other zoning to multifamily or mixed use districts for the express purpose of using the bonus. These cases sometimes included volunteer deed restrictions. So next. As we've seen, as we've been introducing this proposal to stakeholders, we've had some questions about what regulations reside in 51A and what regulations reside in Chapter 20A. So Chapter 51A, the mixed income bonus regulations, they regulate the built environment. That includes the development bonus itself, the development bonus time period, details regarding the permit process, phasing, COs, the development requirements themselves, like unit mix and requirements for finish out, and then design requirements such as pedestrian amenities, fencing, parking locations, doors and windows facing the street, that sort of thing. Next. So 20A is our fair housing chapter, and then 20A Article 2 regulates essentially the people portion of the mixed income bonus. The definitions related to income, rent, area median family income, eligible households, voucher requirements, the procedures that are related to the restrictive covenant itself, and then the procedures that are related to eligibility determination, wait lists, over under occupancy, income limits, affordable rents, tenant selection, all of those things that have to do with the tenants themselves and the folks that are living there. That resides in 20A. And then the comprehensive housing policy catalogs most of the city's housing policies and programs, and the mixed income section of the housing policy as it currently stands points to Chapter 51A and 20A regulations, and then it outlines implementation, operations, and compliance procedures. So just a little bit of background. This program was approved in 2019, just 2 years ago. And there was a concern back in 2019 that no one would use it. And as it turns out, a handful of developments were approved with a base and a bonus scheme prior to the approval of the official program. And then those are included in the 7 communities that are up above, currently under construction. And we have 2 more that are under construction. And then we have 8 that are in pre-development, 16 that are zoning cases that are likely to use the bonus, and another 5 communities using the by right or the type 1 bonus, for a total of more than 4,618 units in mixed income communities. Now, some of these are they're LIHTC projects, they're tax credit projects, and so some of these much bigger affordable unit numbers are because this program helps to support that tax credit program. But we have a ton of developments that really are just market rate developments, and they are using this bonus in order to build modern style developments, and they're setting aside 5 or 10 or 15% of their units for the appropriate income bands. And it's hard to tell that this is a success so far because development takes so long. But if you look at the ramp up of under construction and then pre-development and then in zoning, this is a program that's accelerating. And what we're hoping in One Dallas is that it will accelerate even more. So if we look at the map on the next page, you'll see where these projects are. So they are all the way up in far north Dallas. They're in northeast Dallas. They're clustered around downtown. They're in far southwest Dallas. They're in far southeast Dallas. They're literally all over the city. There are projects that I know of that aren't public yet that are in the north, and projects that are in the south. And so this is a program that's being well used and will continue to be well used, I hope. So the next page is just a little bit of background on the housing department. As we get into a little later in this presentation, the proposal includes an option for developers who get a zoning bonus to pay a fee in lieu of providing those on-site units. Stakeholders have expressed concern about whether that fee in lieu will just sit in a fund or whether it will actually be used. So I want to let you take a look at this slide. This is the current pipeline for housing department developments that have been funded or in the process of being funded in the past few years. This represents more than 7,000 units to be built or renovated all over the city. So not to put too fine a point on this, but our housing department now is fully staffed. with a couple of vacancies, but it's functioning. We're spending money, we're developing projects, and we're creating housing with this money. So if CPC and council decide to approve a fee in lieu, it'll go into a One Dallas fund, and then it will go through the same development process that these funds have been used, and will go out into the community, not just sit in a fund. So next slide. So let's look at the proposed One Dallas options. Here's a quick overview. The key here is additional flexibility and support for developments that are producing or are helping to produce mixed income housing. So this includes a menu of bonus options, and that menu would actually be written into code for new and amended PDs, potentially faster development review, potential benefits for on-site provision, which would be subject to underwriting, and additional methods to meet the reserved unit requirements, including paying a fee in lieu or dedicating land. And then that fee would be deposited into the to be created One Dallas fund. The next slide. All right. So just to review and take a look at the regulatory bonuses, under the current mixed income program, we have what we are proposing to call type 1 developments. That is the by right bonuses in multifamily and mixed use districts. And we have what we're proposing to call type 2 developments. That is developments that are in PDs that have specific bonuses in the existing PDs. One Dallas creates a type 3, where in new and amended PDs, developments could access a menu of bonus options recommended to be written into Chapter 51A 4.1106. These bonus options would be available in PDs that specifically refer to the One Dallas Options Program and the Chapter 51A 4.1106 menu of options. This is in direct response to rapidly changing development economics, where sometimes the cost of construction, labor, materials, etc., change rapidly enough to need some flexibility in the project between the time the zoning is approved and the time the development goes for permitting. As you will see in the chart on the next page, this also directly supports an income band that's not yet well served in the existing mixed income bonus. The proposal is also to recommend a set 5% reserved unit requirement. In the past, staff has recommended 10 to 15% units in these PDs, only to have the actual percentage of reserved units be drastically reduced through the public review process. We recommend setting 5% as the standard so that the development community can plan for this percentage and then not negotiating a lower percentage. Next slide. So this slide is the current recommendation for the menu of bonus options. The options would include density, FAR, height and stories, and a parking reduction. In order to encourage investment in G through I areas, the bonus is higher for those areas and lower for A through F. In addition, the bonuses increase for lower income bands to attempt to offset the cost of the provision of those units. We've gotten some stakeholder comments on the height and stories bonus and are currently reviewing whether the lower end bonus, that is the 5% bonus, should be revisited. Part of the language that we propose, though, is that it rounds up. So if you get a 5% bonus in height and stories, that would go to 1 story at least. So the other thing that we're looking at is in response to stakeholder input is recommending that the required AMI levels for G through I be increased, and that's open to conversation at this point. So in addition to the proposed amendments to Chapter 51A, staff is recommending amendments to Chapter 20A and the Comprehensive Housing Policy. So let's look now at the new proposed pathways for compliance and additional incentives. The current program offers regulatory bonuses, but only if you produce on-site units. In the new One Dallas, as we've discussed, developers can produce units on site, they can pay a fee in lieu, or they can dedicate land. In exchange, they also get potentially faster development review and the potential for financial incentives for on-site provision. Oh, sorry, that's the second. I split these slides. Sorry about that. So we'll go on to the next one, additional incentives. So that explains out the differences that you can get, the additional incentives there. In those applications, there'd been some question about how that financial incentives for on-site provision would actually work. And those under the current recommendation, those applications would be submitted through the Housing Department's financial support application process. It would be subject to underwriting, and it would be designed to support mixed income developments that otherwise are not financially feasible, even with the regulatory bonuses. And we've had some examples of that where folks have been kind of willing to do 51 to 60, for example, but the pro forma won't support that. And so we've ended up having a staff recommendation that wasn't taken, and the reserved units ended up being for 80 to 100 or 100 to 120. This would fix that problem. Folks could apply for funding and then be at 51 to 60. So next slide. So the other thing that we want to look at is some additional amendments to 51A. Because we're recommending a pretty healthy parking reduction in One Dallas, our recommendation is also to look at the parking requirement for type 1, the MF and MU districts. It's currently 1.25 per unit, or 1 per unit for developments with transit proximity. And our proposal is half of a parking space per unit, regardless of the location, so that approximates the parking reduction in proposed type 3 developments. Folks have been concerned that developers won't produce enough parking if we don't require them to, but in conversation after conversation after conversation with developers, they're going to produce the amount of parking that their tenants need, because otherwise they won't be able to lease up their development. If you have a car and you need to park it at home, you're going to want to park it at home, or you're going to go somewhere else. So if we go to the next slide, there's a map actually that shows from census. So this may be a little hard to read depending on how big your screen is, but this map shows that by census block group, in most areas of the city, wherever there's a large cluster of multifamily communities, the vehicle ownership drops. In this map, the darker the green, the higher the percentage of renters with 0 or 1 car in each household. So while there may be examples of communities with a lot of cars, the overall data doesn't support requiring developers to excessively use land for car storage when they could use it for much needed housing. In talking to developers, almost no one is going to build a multifamily community without enough parking for the expected needs of their future tenants. Tangentially to this, land used for surface parking is appraised for tax purposes at almost nothing because there's no improvement on that land, on that portion of the property. So even commercial parking garages in downtown have a minimal effect on the tax base. It's a much more efficient use of land to use it for housing and not for surface, certainly not for surface car storage. So next slide. We also recommend adding language to Chapter 51A 4.1107 to define legacy buildings and to provide exceptions to the design standards at the director's discretion. The current design standards in this section require buildings to face and open out toward the street, require parking to be in the back, they set minimum standards for open space, and they otherwise may have some requirements that are impossible for existing buildings to meet. And so most of the PDs that define legacy buildings also provide parking reductions. If the proposed parking reductions are not approved, then staff recommends including additional parking reductions for these legacy buildings. So this is a little piece that's still under discussion, like what exactly is a legacy building? Do we set a year? Do we set an age? And then what exactly is the language for being able to do exceptions at the director's discretion? So I welcome your feedback on that. So next slide. We also strongly recommend some minor clarifications to the zoning language in 51A, and these are essentially lessons learned over the past few years. One of them is to add a little bit of language that says the parking reduction is X per unit, whatever it ends up being after our conversations, or per code, whichever is less, so that this is not actually a requirement to do more parking than would be otherwise required. And then what came out of conversations with some developers who on purpose asked for multifamily or mixed use districts and then volunteered those deed restrictions, the language currently in 51A doesn't let them participate in this program. So we recommend that, that we modify that language a little bit so that properties in MF and MU districts that have deed restrictions can participate, but the development must follow the stricter requirements. And then inadvertently, the language says that you have to round up and you can also round down for fractions of a required unit. So we want to make it uniform across the board that if you have fractions of a required unit of the total units, that needs to be rounded up. And then transit proximity is defined, but the measurement's not defined. And so we recommend that we update the code to just clarify that it's measured radially, that is, as the crow flies, and not by some complicated, it's sidewalk length or something like that. So, and then also we recommend requiring that developers must certify that they are registered as a vendor with a voucher provider, because it does no good to say that you're not going to discriminate against voucher holders if you haven't actually registered as a vendor with the available voucher providers in the area. We want our developers to be ready to take a voucher holder if they show up in the lobby looking for an apartment. So we're just going to, our recommendation is that they need to get their ducks in a row for that as part of this program. So next slide. In addition to these $1 options, we want to recommend strengthening the language in Chapter 20A to ensure that developers actually do accept vouchers. And so we're recommending that the language in 20A be changed to make it so that multifamily managers shall prioritize holders of housing vouchers for occupancy of the reserved units by putting them at the top of any wait lists, that they register as a vendor, and that they actively market to holders of holders of housing vouchers through their affirmative fair housing marketing plan. They're required to do an affirmative fair housing marketing plan. We just want to make sure that they're actually reaching out to folks who might have a voucher to make sure that those voucher holders are finding out about these units. Next slide. So if this is approved and we have a fee in lieu program, the fees would be deposited into a new $1 fund. And the important thing here is that these fees create an additional locally controlled funding source for housing. So I want to go through this a little bit slowly because there seems to be some concern and some confusion. So in our proposed uses for this fund, we have a few tranches. One is to create and preserve reserved dwelling units and increase affordability in MVA categories A, B, and C, and in rapidly gentrifying D, E, and F. And that's like what I talked about a little bit earlier in terms of offsetting the cost of increasing affordability or offsetting the cost of overall costs so that folks can actually do on-site units in these A, B, and C, and in the rapidly gentrifying D, E, and F areas. The other big use of this fund is to support equitable revitalization in categories D through I. And so that would incentivize new market rate units in mixed income communities. And let me stop for a second and talk about that. So in some of our tax credit properties, we have maybe a 90-10 split where 90% of the units are rent restricted and 10% of them are market. And that's because through the tax credit program, you only get equity for the units that are rent restricted. You don't get any money for the market rate units. Well, in some areas, the market rate rents aren't high enough to pay for the cost of construction for those units. And so it's really hard to get market rate units in those areas. And this fund could be used almost as an economic development fund to create market rate units, which would then create comparable units that would then incentivize the next market rate that would hopefully then generate some investment in the D, E, and F. I'm sorry, the D through I communities. The other thing that we need to do all across the city is to provide additional funding for renovating existing owner-occupied homes. We have families all over the city that don't make a lot of money and they live in homes that need repair, and we don't have enough repair money. So one of the things we could do is to take this $1 fund and actually prop up our existing home repair program and provide a lot more home repair for folks that qualify. Tangentially to that is that we have multifamily communities that either have naturally occurring affordable homes or that are in tax credit homes that are about to end their land use restriction. One of the uses for this fund could be to renovate those existing apartment communities, allow folks to stay where they're already happy to stay, and improve the quality of the buildings there. And then a third equitable revitalization bullet point here is to build new neighborhood infrastructure, especially in support of homeownership opportunities. As you know, if you've done any work at all in Southern Dallas, there's aging infrastructure or non-infrastructure. There are single family communities that have been platted, but there's no infrastructure in them. There are streets that still don't have sewer and water at all. And one of the things that this fund could do is to be used almost like bond money to support infrastructure in support of homeownership opportunities. And then another bullet point for this may be to expand programs in the housing policy itself, including homeownership opportunities such as our mortgage assistance program, which again is ramping up but doesn't have enough money, doesn't have enough flexibility. Locally sourced, locally controlled funding helps us be more flexible in that program. And then because there's not a slot for general fund to run this program right now, in the absence of any general fund that's approved by council, our recommendation is that the One Dallas Fund be used for administration similar to our TIF program, where in our TIF districts, they pay for themselves. The administration comes out of the TIF fund, and then what's left after that is used to encourage development. And the administration tends to be a pretty small portion of the whole TIF fund, but it makes it so that the TIF program is not relying on the general fund. That said, if council wants to provide additional general fund to run this program, that would be terrific. So the final bullet here is funding awarded through the existing development funding application process. And so we have an application, we're refining it and putting it into a really good software called Neighborly. And our recommendation is that this funding would be awarded through our existing highly functioning development funding application process. So with that was a long time on this one slide. We can go on to the next one. And this is just future expansion of One Dallas options. These are the things that have been talked about so far that we are recommending be in a phase 2 of this, that we go forward with the things that need to be fixed, that we go forward with the fee in lieu, and then we turn right around and start working on these additional steps. And that is a voluntary bonus fee for commercial properties to support affordable housing needs that are generated by the use. So if you think about all the jobs that are coming to the city, that's tending to bring families here and bringing folks here. Some of those jobs are, they're below the median income, and they create actually a need for affordable housing. So this is a way that we could do a zoning bonus similar to the current zoning bonus, where there's a base plus a bonus. And then the commercial property could write a check to the fund to support affordable housing needs. This, though, the city attorneys have asked us to start at the beginning with this, with stakeholder, with research, do the whole process, follow the procedures, and come to you with a fully baked, complete program, and not try to kind of add it on or tack it on to the current proposal. The other one that we really want to take a step back and think about carefully so we can craft it carefully and then bring it forward to you is to create a bonus program that's directly related to the construction of single family or other for sale residential uses. We have a bonus program for multifamily that could include condos, but we don't currently have a program for what an affordable for sale condo unit looks like. So we would like to get this portion of the One Dallas options done and through the council process, and then turn around and do the proper research to talk to stakeholders and figure out what that would actually look like. And then the third thing that folks have asked for is bonuses for additional green elements. We want to make sure that we aren't dissuading folks from using this program by adding additional requirements to the construction. On the other hand, tight, properly insulated green homes are less expensive to run, and so this ends up being a good thing for new homeowners. And so it's an idea we want to explore, but we want to take the time to explore it properly. So with that, I'll turn it back over to y'all and take questions and comments. I hope that this has been helpful.
It has been very helpful. Thank you, Ms. Thompson, for the excellent briefing. Commissioners, just a quick note. The goal today is just to offer input to staff. Staff will then go back, reassess, readjust, and then come back possibly for a second briefing before a vote at a future date. Also, just logistically, I do have a laptop here and I can see all of you. When you want to speak, you can just raise your hand to the camera or just turn your mic on and I will see the light. So now we will go to questions, commissioners. Commissioner Young, I see your finger going right at that.
Well, I was deferring to people online, but since you've chosen me, I'll go ahead. I want to explore the parking reduction with an example. Large parts of East Dallas and Oak Cliff have single-family development largely, but on multifamily zoning, and multifamily units are sprinkled in. And I want to suppose that I'm building an 80-unit development, multifamily, in one of those neighborhoods. Right now, I need 100 parking spaces for that at 1.25 per unit. As I understand, if I provide 4 affordable housing units, my parking requirement will drop from 100 spaces to 40 spaces. Am I doing the math right?
Yes.
All right. And your assumption is that the protection against spillover parking will be protection only coming from market pressures. Is that right?
Yes.
And you're not taking into account the possibility of spillover parking into the neighborhood. Is that right?
Sure. There is always the concern of spillover parking into the neighborhood. But two things. One is that in conversation after conversation after conversation with developers, they long remember those poor projects that didn't bother to park themselves properly and how
I'm
hard
sorry,
it was.
I'm not hearing you.
Am I not? Oh, maybe let me move my a little better.
Yeah, I heard
Okay.
conversations with developers.
So in conversation after conversation after conversation with developers, we have heard that they won't lease up their property if they don't produce enough parking, if they don't provide enough parking for their tenants. And there are horror stories that get handed down in the development community about the property that decided to go ahead and go forward without enough parking, and how the development entity had to own the units because they couldn't sell because they didn't have enough parking. So our recommendation is that we move to a market-driven requirement for parking, that we stop requiring more parking than is actually necessary, and that we honestly remind folks that the right-of-way belongs to everybody. And so, the street in front of your development or in front of your house or in front of your shop actually isn't yours. It belongs to the city. And so that should be used for the benefit of everybody rather than creating a bunch of additional parking that's not needed at the end of the day.
That raises a question about process. You mentioned conversation after conversation after conversation with developers. Can you describe what other community input has led to this draft recommendation?
So we did, I do have to tell you that the parking reduction has gone through a bunch of consultant conversations, and then we also took it to the Housing Policy Task Force. Not this individual one for the type 1 developments, because that was something we recognized last week or the week before, that we were going to start to incentivize PDs again if we didn't fix the parking on the MF1 and MF2 side of this program. So we did talk though with the Housing Policy Task Force about parking reductions and got no negative responses from advocates and from renters and from tenants and from folks on the Housing Policy Task Force for this.
Did you make any outreach to neighborhood associations, either individual neighborhood associations or the umbrella groups such as the Dallas Homeowners League and the North Dallas Neighborhood Alliance?
I have not, no, because this is a multifamily proposal.
All right. On your defining proximity to transit radially, that would mean that if a DART station is on one side of a freeway, the properties on the opposite side of the freeway would likely qualify as within proximity to transit. Is that right?
That's unfortunate, but correct. And this is actually how we've been doing it operationally. And this is because oftentimes around transit, the development around the transit is changing rapidly. It's improving rapidly. The pedestrian amenities are getting better. And it is a very simple, cut and dry way to say, are you within half mile of this site or not, if it's addressed radially, because it's something that can be mapped and can be shown and can be supported.
All right, but there might be cases where you would have to walk a mile or more to get to transit, even though as the crow flies, you'd be within a half a mile.
There might, yeah.
All right. Back on the parking for a second, did you do any research as to whether the commission or council had approved type 2 PDs with parking reductions as steep as a half space per unit?
I have not, but I can look through that.
All right, well, wouldn't that be key to analyzing whether we are disincentivizing type 1 development and favoring type 2 development because of excess parking, to know whether right now 0.5 is achievable under type 2? Because I'll say I don't recall any with parking reductions that steep. All right.
I don't think I do either, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Chair, if we're offering comments as well as questions, let me just say that I cannot support this at the present time, particularly in light of the depth of the parking reductions and some other issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Thompson and Mr. Doss, thank you for that presentation and the overview of the program. It's two specific questions. You touched on in your briefing that the 5% is proposed for the new type 3 projects. Could you speak to, in a little more detail, how you arrived as that is the minimum?
That's been our staff recommendation for the last year or so, is that regardless of the bonus, that we recommend 5% of the units to be set aside at a particular AMI based on the MVA category. And that is in direct response to a lot of research that we did, a lot of looking back at what had gone through CPC, and a discovery that there was absolutely no connection between staff recommendation and what CPC and council eventually proposed. There was no connection between staff recommendation, the final percentage of units set aside, and the amount of the bonus. The one connection where you could actually see a correlation statistically is where, and I can't remember exactly how we did the math, but where the bonus sort of felt like it was a lot, then we could get more units out of that development, but not where the bonus actually was a lot. And so given that we had this long history of having no connection between the amount of the bonus and the number of units, our recommendation is a stable 5% so the development community can plan for that. And then the reason that we chose 5% rather than 10 is that in all of the pro formas that I did hundreds of pro formas when I was originally doing this mixed income program. And as long as you're not renting those units at 0, you can do almost anything with 5% of the units. depending on, you know, the cost of the land, the cost of the construction. But once you start trying to get 10% of the units out, that's where performers start breaking right and left. And it doesn't matter how much additional development rights you get, you're not going to offset the cost of the units. And so our recommendation is just a standard 5% because the performers tend to be able to support that. And because asking for more than that doesn't end up actually coming to fruition at the end of the day. And we want something that's stable.
And just to explore that a little bit further, so it was understanding of how you reviewed that set the 5% as the base and then uncoupled it, if you will, from the AMFI and the MBA categories, because then your bonus structure fell wherever you were going to provide the units. Is that correct?
Right. We kept the tie between the MBA categories and the AMI because
but not the percentage.
But not the percentage. Exactly. Because, you know, in an MBA A, B, and C, the 51 to 60% families, for example, are the ones that are least likely to be able to find any housing of whatever quality in an A, B, and C area. And so we wanted to provide that completely missing or potentially completely missing housing.
And so, and is it correct that I think staff is with the creation of this program and, you know, presuming that it moves through CPC and on to council, that type 3 becomes the new model and type 2 stay, but they have the opportunity to participate in a One Dallas program. Is that correct?
Yes, I should have been a little more clear about that. I'm sorry that I didn't line that out perfectly, that under our recommendation, the type 1, type 2, and type 3 can avail themselves of the additional financial incentives, of the faster process review, of the support of the development liaison that I'm about to hire if things go well, so that they can get through the process a little faster. The thing that we need to keep in mind is that you only get financial benefits if you're doing units on site. We're not going to just trade checks. So, you know, if you write a fee in lieu, I'm not going to give you a development fee reimbursement. That's crazy talk. We could just like not trade checks. So you have to do on site if you want financial incentives. But if you're writing a fee in lieu, you can get the additional process incentives and the additional bonuses. And yes, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yes, to your point, type 2 is those existing PDs that actually have the bonus specified. And the hope and the idea here is that for future PDs, you could just say in the PD, this PD qualifies for One Dallas. Go look at the One Dallas provisions. Here's this menu of bonuses, and that's the end of the negotiation. That it's just the base is what's negotiated, and then the bonus is just by reference.
But would it also be possible within an existing type 1, or excuse me, type 2, that you could close the gap? For instance, we've seen a number of projects that have come through at either 3% or 3.5%. Could you also get to the 5% by contributing to the fee in lieu?
So if you're doing on site, you wouldn't.
I've lost you. We lost, you're still eliminated, but we can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Ms. Thompson. The mic light seems to be on, but maybe I'll toggle it a little bit. No. Not yet.
Chair, she may need to go all the way out and come back in order to reset herself so she can be heard.
Ms. Thompson, do you have your phone there? I can just put you on speaker. Let's see if it works. You want to give it a shot? Can you? Oh, we lost you.
I can.
Okay.
Oh,
Can you speak a little bit, see if the commissioners can hear you?
yes. I have lost them though, I think.
Okay. Yes, you're
so-
no longer on our screen, but they can hear you through
Yeah,
the phone,
all right.
but we
I'm
have to
going to
see
stay
you.
on the phone with you. I'm going to exit this meeting and come back.
Okay.
And I've of course lost what Commissioner Hampton's question was.
We'll reset. We have to be able to see you, so let's see if that works.
Oh, that's right.
Commissioners, while she is logging back on, do we have any questions for Mr. Doss? He's patiently waiting.
I guess I'll take a stab at it. So Mr. Doss, Ms. Thompson covered that you guys are investigating the legacy building definitions and the questions. Could you speak just a little bit of where staff is at in terms of those? I know one of the questions was whether or not to use, I know one of the discussion points was 50 years as sort of the metric on what would qualify under the legacy building definition that might be incorporated. Are there any other considerations that you wanted to highlight for the commissioners?
Sure. So we looked at a few PDs to kind of see, because that's where kind of the legacy building term comes from. And I've looked at Cedars, for example, that we just updated. And in certain areas of Cedars, it's the year is 1967. If your building is before then in these specific areas, the designated legacy building areas, then you are a legacy building and you get X, Y, and Z, parking reduction, exemptions from certain standards, that kind of thing. And in the rest of that district, it's 1970. I haven't been able to talk to anyone to see why 70 is the year versus these other areas get to be 3 years older. Trying to see what happens there. But a good year, if we just wanted to keep it simple, we could say 1967. That's the year that Chapter 51 was adopted. So that would be the year that
Mr. Doss, just pardon me, maybe could you get a little bit closer to the microphone?
Sure,
We have some commissioners that can't quite hear you, and then also Ms. Thompson, I think, needs to be added as a participant. Thank you, sir.
Sure. So if we could use 1967 as the year. Theoretically, after 1967, everything built since then should generally comply with Chapter 51. Of course, it's been amended and changed, but that would be, I haven't compared the 66 code to the 67 code, but theoretically, that would be the cutoff where everything is just different now because we're in this new code, Chapter 51. I don't know that that's the best solution, but that's where I've landed right now. If we say 50 years, it's always going to be a moving target. And is that 50 years from the day you get your permit issued? Is it 50 years from the day you apply? Is it 50 years from when you start to think about applying? Because if you go back and look at state law, they talk about, your permit starts the day you talk to the city about getting a permit. And so there's a lot of questions that go along with saying just 50 years. So if I had to just choose one right now, I would demur and I'd say let's think about it some more.
Okay, so thank you for that.
FYI, it's 1965 that Chapter 51 was adopted.
That's correct.
Thank you, Commissioner Young, for the clarification. Mr. Doss, I think if you went back and looked at the staff report for the Cedars specifically, I think there's similar language in the Deep Ellum PD. There's also provisions regarding the amount of the structure that must be maintained to make sure that we're actually meeting the goal of historic preservation. So are those the types of items that staff is incorporating into a draft for consideration?
Yes, we are. We're trying to craft that so it is hopefully easy enough to understand, and we don't. Yes, we're looking at all of those things.
Understood. And I think Ms. Thompson mentioned that you guys are evaluating the parking in relation to both the type 3, but also what might be appropriate in consideration of legacy building, again, similar to how other PDs have been crafted that include this designation.
Yes, absolutely. And the legacy building, I don't want to call it an exemption, but the legacy building modifications to the required design standards would be for those quote unquote type 1 developments, those base district projects. And that language could be incorporated into a type 3 development in the PD language. And so that could then, that definition of course could change, because in a PD you can change anything. So each individual type 3 development could have their own definition of legacy building that's specific to that area, which is the intent of a PD anyway, is to create a special district for a unique circumstance.
Okay, so the legacy building definition will apply to primarily type 1, but be available to be, whether it's a future type 2, if that happened to move forward, or the type 3 could then reference back to those standards as a base.
Yes, it could do what every PD, you know, we started a reference to chapter 51A section, whatever, and then we modify it as we need to. So that would be, yes, that you would have your kind of, here's the general definition of a legacy building. All type 1s are going to use that one. And then if the PD, if you have a type 3 come in with a newer amended PD, you could say, yeah, that, but a different year, or, but we want to preserve more of that building or more of the facade, that sort of thing.
Understood.
I think
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Pam is back on video.
Yes, Pam, you want to test it out?
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
All right, we're ready for more questions then. Commissioner Kingston.
Thank you. You know, I have some of the same concerns that Commissioner Young has with regard to parking, and I know that we've had a lot of these discussions in ZOAC talking about amendments to the parking code. And I guess my concern about 0.5 is I'm just coming off of negotiating 3 large multifamily projects, and not one of those people has asked for a parking reduction greater than 1 space per unit. And they are in places that are close to transit. I mean, they're one's off the Katy Trail and relatively close to DART. The other 2 are in Uptown and close to a variety of different types of transit. And so, you know, 0.5 seems aggressive to me, and it seems particularly aggressive when you think about these older neighborhoods in East Dallas that have multifamily zoned lots and multifamily development that might be good for redevelopment using some of these tools. And I can tell you what the neighborhood reaction would be, not unhappy that we had mixed income development, but unhappy that it was parked all up and down the street, creating congestion in the street and pedestrian and micromobility obstacles to using the street as streets are intended. So I'm a little bit concerned about that number. I'm also concerned about the 5% minimum or maximum, I guess minimum for the PDs. I think part of the reason you're seeing negotiated amounts in 2 or 3 or 4% is because the development community has not been expected to do more or trained to do more, however you want to phrase that. And I think that's changing, and I think it's changing rapidly. And particularly when you're looking at high opportunity areas that tend to be a little more expensive. I think that 5% is low. And I think if we push that envelope a little bit, we're going to get that participation from the development community. And when you have something like the tool of a PD that you can always go in and say, well, this particular project is, you know, more expensive for this reason or that reason, or less expensive and we can afford to do more. You've got that flexibility, but 5% just seems like a minimum that is not very bold. And so I would like to see that number. Maybe 10% is too much. Maybe 6% or 7% is more realistic. But I think we're underestimating the development community, particularly if we have some tools out there in the One Dallas Fund that can bridge some gaps on special projects. So that, let's see, I've got some other feedback. I haven't heard anything about requirement while we're talking about parking for micromobility. Every new building that's coming online, especially the larger ones, are planning for their electrical system to be able to accommodate EV parking spaces. They're putting the conduits into the building, so all they have to do is run the cable and put in plugs. They're starting out by having plugs for EV, including micromobility, not just cars. And I don't, on these, particularly these larger projects, I'm requiring it as a condition to get my support, and so is Oaklawn Committee, to have on-site micromobility parking, on-site charging for micromobility, and on-site charging for cars, and the ability of these buildings to accommodate increasing amounts of electric vehicle use. And I would like to see that incorporated into this as one of the conditions for getting these bonuses, because I think that, you know, every developer I talk to believes that electric vehicles is the way that we're heading, and that we have to be planning for that. And it's far cheaper to plan for it now while we're constructing these buildings than go back and try to retrofit them. And I think you guys have probably heard a lot of my comments in ZOAC, so I'll reserve the rest for the next iteration, but thank you.
Commissioner Stannard? We'll get to you right after her, Commissioner Blair.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Yes, this is Commissioner Stannard. You know, I have to reiterate what Commissioner Young and Commissioner Kingston have said. This thing that we're talking about, let's reduce the parking and utilize the streets, is backward thinking to me. I live in an area where we are a bunch of multifamily condominiums. And what's happening with the streets is we have, they are just inundated with service people, service trucks, construction trucks, the landscape people. And to say that we're going to cut for an 80-unit place, we're going to cut it from 100 units down to 40 is the opposite, as far as I can see, that what we should be doing. We talk about walkability, et cetera, but then we're saying, well, the streets are available, so we'll make that the backup parking. I think at the minimum, anywhere, because as we know, many people have 2 cars in one unit, and we know that, and there might be another unit that has none. But I believe that it should be at minimum, you know, 1 space per unit. I can't imagine, you know, going under that and saying we're going to use the streets as the backup. I just don't think in today's world that's realistic. So I have an issue with that. And I also have an issue, and I think it's how you have to think about the way things function. Everything is about the real world. How does it really function when you're living there, working there, riding there, and whatever? Now, I also think this thing about the 5%, I mean, I know when we were doing development, and of course this is in North Dallas, but the same thing kept coming up. Nobody wanted to use the bonuses, and then in the PDs, as Pam said, they would negotiate down from 10 to 15% and get it down to 3%. Well, I don't think we give in to that trend. I think we should go the opposite way. If we're trying to get 10 to 15% and giving bonuses to do that, then let's do get more, half of that at 8%. But I mean, I don't think we should sort of be giving in that we go to the lowest possible. And I just, again, think the new policy today is to have mixed income housing. And we should have programs that promote that. And I don't think going down to 5% because developers won't do more and will try to do a PD, we can't give in to that, is my feeling. The last thing I want to say is about talking about you look into incentives about going green. Once again, like Commissioner Kingston was saying about, charging station, I mean, there should be some incentives. I mean, they've just turned around. There've been articles just this week about solar panel roofing, being so much cheaper than it's ever been before. And I think anything that is, dealing with the future, with climate change, with going green, that we should give in mixed income housing incentives to developers, so it moves them to want to do it. It gives them a reason to, and I don't think that should be just looked into. I think that should be a part of this. And that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Stannard. On to Commissioner Blair.
Okay, thank you. I have to agree. Commissioner Young, he took a lot of my questions away from me. And Commissioner Stannard, you just hit on my 5% versus a higher percent. I think 10% is valid. I want to also, but I do want to hit on the parking when it comes down to allowing the developers to decide what's good for the community. I don't believe that is a good way to go. So my question is, how do we assure that staff, community, and developers are getting it right? You can't do it after the fact. So the question would be, how do we put into place a process that determines what is right from what is wrong, based on the needs of a community?
Was that a question for staff, Commissioner Blair? Or is that
question for Pam or Mr. Doss? How do we we have a tendency here to put processes and policies into place, and then once they're put into place and they try to go into react to reality, we have to come back to the drawing table because they're not quite right. How do we put into place that says that that it's okay to cut the parking, and then once the development has been done and the bonuses have been given, then we find out that the math was all wrong?
So I'm going to plug the other code amendment that ZOAC has been chewing on for a while, the parking amendments and the transportation demand management requirements that would go along with any elimination of parking requirements. Essentially, for that, under that model, you would prove up to us that you know how you're going to manage the transportation demand that your development is going to be placing onto the streets, the sidewalks, the community. Through a variety of ways, parking the cars, which I think, as Pam mentioned, we've had several discussions where those parking requirements, the parking that is provided by each development isn't necessarily driven by city requirements. It's driven by lender requirements, tenant requirements, and kind of they look at our numbers last, and sometimes they're higher than our numbers. So I think that that's one strategy to meet the transportation demand that is being created. But there are other strategies. There are the micromobility strategies. There are the shared vehicle strategies. There are a lot of bike parking, transit proximity, transit stop improvements nearby. There's all these other mechanisms that you can show to us that you're going to use. Now, of course, we have to acknowledge that we know we're Dallas. We know largely we're a driving city, but we have to also recognize that that is changing. We showed the map earlier of the percentage of homes in each census tract with 0 or 1 car. And I'd love to get that down to 0 cars and see what that map looks like. So I think we need to be able to look at all of those situations. And I don't have the answer to how do we make sure. Maybe it's the TDM, you have your TDM you present with your permitting packet or with your zoning packet, the same way they do with schools. And then you've got to come back to us, and if we look at your property, we're getting complaints about traffic or 1, 2, or 3. Hey, it's been 2 years. Let's look at your TDM and what's not working about it. And that maybe that is the answer. Maybe that's not the answer. But the solution that we've been using since I believe 1965 has been put a bunch of parking spaces there on your site. And if you can meet these really convoluted requirements, you can share sometimes, maybe, if you can make it work. And, just buy the building next door, knock it down, and put your parking spaces there. We can keep doing that, or we can look forward and see what are the other options we have to manage that. And again, we know cars are there, cars exist, cars will exist, but those things are changing, even here in Dallas.
Let me go on with your premise. And let me go with transportation in respect to public transportation and the use of bikes. I live in a community where there are no bikes. We don't ride bikes. We don't walk. Heaven forbid if we walked around the corner. But when you look at parking and has there been a consideration of the DART rail, not the rail, but the bus services in a community that you're trying to reduce the parking? And DART has just proposed on January 24th, they're going to be changing routes. And in the southern sector, the southern area, specifically in the south, we're losing a lot of routes. So when you're talking about getting people to their jobs through DART, the inland import already has the inability to get people their last mile to their job. Well, now that mile has grown from the inability has grown from 1 mile to 2 because DART has abandoned the community. So how do you justify a blanketed premise to say reduce the parking when DART itself has reduced its services to be lack of services in the communities that really need the parking?
And that is that's an excellent point. And the again, there's not an answer, but
I know.
we can use the tools we have at our disposal in terms of our development regulations to try to move that needle. And obviously, we can't tell DART what to do necessarily, but we can hopefully nudge and work with them, and we could create those amenities. And it's not going to solve the entire problem. And again, I do think that if I'm building a 250 unit apartment complex, no matter where it is, I should also be able to figure out how many parking spaces I need without the city telling me, hey, 1.25, 1.5, 2 per bedroom, whatever. Hopefully, if I'm in that deep on doing a big apartment complex, somewhere where the process is as complex as it is here, wouldn't the person who spent a year working on that project be better suited to determine the needs of that project than me, quite frankly, as the planner who is working on these other things? Am I better suited to make that choice of 1.25, 1.5, or is that the person who's been doing this for a year on one specific project?
I want to pop in for a second and say that I had this conversation with a developer who essentially through email looked at me very patiently and said, well, you can require half a space per unit, but I build in areas that don't have transit, and I build 3-story walk up, and I'm going to produce 1.5 spaces per unit, because that's what my tenants will need. And so I think it's important to understand that if we do turn this over to the market, that we're not going to get half a space per unit if that's not going to work in that particular location. And especially, Commissioner Blair, in your district, where you're right, there's no sidewalks, there's no DART, there's no nothing. Like, the parking needs to be provided because people need cars out there.
So I do hope city staff is hearing you, so that every time we have a development, we don't have to have a discussion and a disagreement on how to adequately park a development, whether it be retail and or residential, based on what services are available in that community. The last thing I want to do is say thank you for hearing me. I saw the changes when it came down to home ownership, and you went past what I asked for. And I Mr. Dawson, Ms. Thompson, I just really want to say thank you for hearing me. It means a lot that you did. Thank you, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Blair. Commissioner Suler.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this excellent report and for sending the slideshow yesterday. I believe I think that's great to have. And I just want to reiterate that the 5% affordability, I echo what the other commissioners have said. I think we're just eating around the edges. I was struck by a slide earlier in the show that I believe there are nearly 1,700 units in progress right now, and only about 107 of them are within those affordable ranges. But I had a question about the fee in lieu of program. Have you guys run any numbers or data on how often this program might be used, and how how much money might be deposited in the One Dallas Fund annually, and how realistic a conduit this program might be for large-scale infrastructure projects like sewage and renovations in neighborhoods. I think it sounds like an excellent program. I'm just wondering how realistic it is.
So we're still working with the consultant to fine tune what that fee would be. And we're still looking at what some of the other cities are doing and where those cities are happy with what they have and where they acknowledge that they've been giving away development rights and we probably shouldn't mimic what they're doing. So we're not sure right now, but an easy math number is $10 a foot, which is about where we've been kind of circling around. And so you can use that number. Our intention is to say $10 a foot square footage of the project, not including parking, blah, blah, but the gross square footage of the project. And we want to do that rather than based on the bonus or based on some additional or whatever, because it's too hard to figure out what that actual bonus is worth. If we're talking FAR and height and setbacks or whatever, like, I don't know how much that is. It's hard. So just $10 per foot on a gross square footage basis for the whole project. And there you go. And the consultants are still working on this. The idea is that it's a little too pricey for stick-built developments to do the fee in lieu, that it would be easier for them to just do on-site development, particularly if they can ask for some money to make themselves whole, and that it would be achievable for the very expensive high-rise steel construction elevator projects, and that we would actually generate some money. So, you know, a $500,000 square foot building, you know, times $10 a foot is a significant chunk of change that we could actually then use for some of these things.
Thank you very much for that. It might be good on the final report to have some examples of that kind of thing. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of more questions, commissioners, before we move on. Commissioner Carpenter.
I'm not sure where to start because I have dozens, if not 100 questions, because I sent 3 long emails yesterday to Ms. Thompson and Mr. Doss about all aspects of this program. But I know we rather glossed over the land donation part of this. What is the intention? I mean, I know the intention originally of mixed income housing was to get on-site units spread geographically across the city. It seems like with fees in lieu and with land donation, we could be undercutting that unless we're somehow partitioning the funds generated by, say, fees in lieu to keep those in, do the fees in lieu generated by a very expensive elevator project you just referenced, are those fees going to be used to provide affordable housing in the same general area? Or are they going to be very geographically remote? Are we running the risk of clustering affordable units in areas of town where the land is more affordable? Likewise, if you're having one fee for the fee in lieu, does that really accurately reflect the cost of construction, whatever the land cost is in an elevator project? And then when you get into land donation, I'm not even understanding what the purpose of the land donation is. Is it land that is, I mean, how is a comparable value going to be determined? Is it appraised value of the land? Is the land supposed to be zoned and suitable for residential construction? Can it be industrial land? Can it be in a part of town where the land is much cheaper? Can it be in a floodplain? Can it be in a brownfield? There are just all sorts of variables here. So if you can address a little bit, address the possibility that fees in lieu and land donation could result in these units not being spread across the city, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. So we'll start with the land donation. And the purpose of that is really just to provide additional flexibility for a developer, given that the value of the land has to be the same or greater than the fee in lieu. I'm not sure we'll get a lot of developers to take us up on that, but it is something that that we have been asked to include in this so that there's additional opportunities for that. All of the land would need to be accepted by City Council, which means that it would need to go through a staff review and then a staff recommendation that we accept this land, and then it would have to go to council, and council would have to vote to accept it as well, because we can't just acquire land from this for the city and not send it through council. So it would all be subject to one by one council review. And for those reasons, I don't see a lot of folks doing this, but it's possible. Be continuing to take your I got all your questions yesterday or 2 days ago, and frankly didn't get through all of them, as you know, but I'm really glad to have the bullet list of things to think about. You know, the mind goes wild here. We're going to send all these ideas over, and so we're working through those, Commissioner Carpenter, and grateful for them. So we'll continue to refine the requirements under which staff recommendation would be in support of doing land dedication, because you're right, you know, floodplain does us no good, really. I mean, you could donate that. Even the parks don't really want floodplain because you can't do a park on it. So that helps from a climate standpoint, but it doesn't help from a housing standpoint. And then you had a question about how we were using the fee. One of the things I neglected to clarify in the presentation today is that our current recommendation is to split the fees between the A, B, and C to increase affordability in those areas, and the D through I to encourage equitable revitalization, so that it's not necessarily that we split it by the source of the funds, but that we split it by the use of the funds, so that we are hitting both sides of what we've been asked to hit. One is to increase affordability in these areas that are otherwise out of reach, and the other is to increase investment in the areas that have been neglected so far. So was there another question in there, or did I get most of?
I think you hit most of that, yes. I had questions also about, is the 5% now, I mean, I know I've been able to negotiate some projects recently that have more than 5% affordable housing. I would hate to see the 5% be the cap and the roof, so to speak. You know, is the intention that an applicant would be, you know, it'd be open sesame if they provide 5% of their units as affordable, that they would then be automatically entitled to all of the bonuses? I mean, is there any incentive beyond that to offer more affordable housing?
You know, one of the things that is really beneficial about taking ideas out to a group of stakeholders is that you hear over and over and over again that your idea is not big enough. And if we are able to do this fee in lieu so that we can generate money to offset the cost of affordable housing, then the biggest complaint that I've heard from developers, which is, this breaks my pro forma. I can do 5%, but I can't afford to do 10%. Well, that complaint is off the table. And so one of the things that we'll take back and talk to staff about is, you know, if we can get a fee in lieu, then we can ask for 10%. And then if it breaks the pro forma, then fine. They just need to apply for funding and fill the gap, and we're off and running again. So in answer to your question, yes, the idea is that it's a menu of options, a menu of bonuses. And so if you hit the minimum thresholds that we've stated, then you get the bonus that's there, so that kind of negotiation settles down a little bit, and there's a known quantity of what's asked and what's given in return.
So is the intention that this program is going to develop a spine, that 5% is going to be absolutely the lowest percentage, and that they have to adhere to the recommended income levels, and that we won't be getting reports where staff is recommending approval of programs that, you know, are giving 2% and it's 100 to 120 and they're doubling their specialty units and all of that? Is the idea for tier 2, tier 3, these programs, I mean, 5% and the appropriate income level is going to be just That's it. It's expected. If you don't do those, you don't get the bonuses.
That's the idea, and that's been what we've been trying to do more or less successfully over the past, because frankly, it's been at the CPC and council level that the numbers have gone down again. And so I'm thrilled as a housing advocate, I'm thrilled to see so many voices on CPC tell me that 5% is not enough and that there's support on CPC for 7 or 8 or 10%. That, I mean, if it's not just a, if it's not just a play or something, but instead we can say, no, this is what our staff recommendation is, and CPC and council will back us up, then let's go for 10% if we can, you know, if we've got the support for that.
And that access to those other incentives, you know, the H team that is supposed to be created, that all of that's done behind the scenes, so to speak. It doesn't go to CPC. Those incentives would be strictly tied to providing these percentages and these income bands.
Those incentives would be tied to providing the incentives in the income bands, or to the faster process would be provided if you're cutting a check and getting the bonus. So that faster process is considered part of the bonus.
I do have some concern about one aspect of the program. It said that there would be some flexibility as to what bonuses could be obtained by a developer between the time of zoning and the time of permitting. Since these type 3, well, the type 2 and the type 3 both are PD processes where they're, you know, very nuanced, complex. They can be complex negotiations, you know, trading off certain aspects, whether it's green space or electrical charging stations or whatever it is for bonuses. I'm a lot concerned actually about how the deal could be changed between the time it goes to CPC and City Council and the time it would go to permitting, where there could be trade-offs potentially happening that CPC and City Council and the neighbors would never have agreed to. So can you explain a little bit how that is supposed to work?
So
I'm going to hand it over to Stephen.
Yeah. So when we talk about the type 3 developments, and you know, they would include by reference, hey, we're going to comply with 41106 or whatever section it ends up being in. That menu of options, we're going to provide X unit. They're 5% of our units at this income band. We're going to get those. That's all in a PD. So and typically, as you know, PDs have a development plan associated with them, and any changes to that has to come back to CPC and council for approval. So we say there's flexibility between those stages. That's only if you don't put in the requirement for the development plan. That would be, I have a type 3 PD. I worked through all my conditions, and CPC and council approved me with, you know, the potential to use these bonuses, but without requiring me to have a development plan, which is possible, but I don't know that that's very likely to occur. And Pam, do you have anything to kind of flesh that out a little more for me?
To this, just to be a little more clear, this menu, if the PD was approved and the developer was able to access that menu of you get this much for giving us this, you get this much for giving us this, is exactly the same concept as the menu of bonuses within the MF and the MU districts now, where if you set aside 5%, you get 1 story in MF1. If you set aside 10%, you get 2 stories. If you set aside 15%, you get 3 stories. It's the same concept. You get MF1 zoning, and then you could go up to 7 stories or so, depending on how many units you set aside with that MF1 zoning. Similarly with this PD, you would just have access to this menu and then could fine tune between the time you got the zoning and the time that you pulled your permit. Of course, acknowledging the issue with development plan. But it wouldn't be that you could just sky's the limit, start over. You'd have to be within this set menu, whatever is approved by CPC and council.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Commissioners, we're clearly short on time here, and as discussed before, let's just consider this part one of the briefing, and there will be a part two before we even consider a vote. And I know there are a couple of questions here in round two, so I'll go ahead and take those, but just let's please try to be as brief as possible. Commissioner Young, please.
Yes, I think what's going on here is the intermixture of two different policy agendas, and I think that's unwise. First, we have the policy agenda of improving the Chapter 51A provisions regarding affordable housing as part of a comprehensive review of all of the city's affordable housing ordinances. And I think in that context, considering a modest parking reduction incentive is appropriate. We then have the policy agenda that has been going on for quite a while at the ZOAC level regarding revisions to the city's parking code overall. And I think Mr. Das was quite candid in expressing his views on that issue. I think it is a mistake to link the two issues. I think it's a mistake from a timing standpoint. I don't see how you can get this out in the first 2 quarters of 2022 if it requires buy-in to the concept of market-driven parking requirements across the board. I think it's a mistake in terms of generating controversy. I think if you do this, you will have large numbers of people opposing the ordinance who might not oppose it if that were not included. And I just think it is a serious mistake. If this ordinance is held hostage by a market-driven parking requirement, you will lose my vote. You may lose other commissioners' votes. You will buy into a lot of controversy. And as the lengthy discussions at ZOAC would indicate, you'll buy into a lot of delay. So I would urge you to decouple those two issues.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, and as always, staff is available. I know that there are some other commissioners that sent in questions. Commissioner Carpenter, in fact, did send in 2 or 3 pages worth of questions, and I know Ms. Thompson is open to that. Fully suspect that there will be some of us reaching out just to do just that. Ms. Thompson, Mr. Doss, thank you so much. Commissioners, why don't we take a 5-minute break here? Just a real quick break, and then we'll come back and begin the docket. Thank you. Let's dive into the docket and begin with the miscellaneous item. And Ms. Seaton, good afternoon. Happy New Year.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Happy New Year. Can you hear me?
We can.
Athena, is it staff conference room? Is that what the computer is named?
Yes, staff conference room. Yes.
Okay.